Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I indicated earlier that when we sought to bring these pieces of legislation to this Honourable House, we knew that it was equally important to launch an educational campaign. And, Madam Speaker, I wish to use one of our posters to, I don't know if the camera is catching all of it, but this is in essence what this bill does. It allows someone to go to the Ministry of Faith-Based Affairs and apply. Bring the
You don't get that picture in your hand, sir.
That's a good question. Yes. A person can go and under the Freedom of Conscious Cannabis Bill, they can apply for a license. What that license does is that it allows you to do four things, Madam Speaker. With that license, it is legal for you, an adult, to cultivate up to 5 cannabis plants in a secured area within your private premises, to possess up to 56 grams or 2 ounces of cannabis in certain public places, to possess up to 15 grams or 0.5 ounces of cannabis resin in certain public places, as well as to smoke cannabis or cannabis resin in areas designated for smoking pursuant to the Smoking Designated Area Act. Madam Speaker, in essence, what this bill does, it legalizes the religious and freedom of conscience use of cannabis. This is also momentous, Madam Speaker, as the mover of the bill has indicated. When the National Cannabis Commission went around St. Kitts and Nevis to find out what people thought about cannabis to determine a way forward, they submitted a report in 2019, Madam Speaker. And in that report, I crave your indulgence. They said, cannabis was first introduced into the Caribbean region by East Indian indentured laborers during the post-emancipation era. There is a significant use of cannabis in St. Kitts and Nevis up to the present time. Approximately 28% of our local population uses cannabis, and almost 45% have used cannabis at some point in the past.
Those figures apply to this Honourable House as well.
How do polls work?
40% of the people in here.
Yeah, 45%. Madam Speaker, the summary of the findings from the town hall and focus group discussions was that 87% of the people wanted to see the law changed. More persons preferred decriminalization versus legalization. And the respondents wanted legislative change. 67% wanted change to allow recreational use. And 65.4% wanted change to allow for religious purposes. So when we went about this journey of finding how to create this personal use structure to comply with the decision of the court in the Ras Sankofa case, we had to preserve the privacy right recognized in that judgment, as well as the religious right. So what this bill, this short, simple bill does, it allows persons who use cannabis for their sacramental purposes, their belief-based purposes, their upliftment and edification purposes, whether it be Rasta or not Rasta, can apply for their license in this regulated regime to be able to lawfully, not decriminalize, lawfully cultivate 5 cannabis plants in a secured area in their private premises, so as to not allow minors and persons vulnerable to substance abuse to have access to that cannabis, to possess up to 2 ounces of cannabis similarly and walk around with it in certain public places, as well as to enter into designated smoking areas with their less than 2 ounces of cannabis or less than 0.5 ounces of cannabis resin to smoke in designated areas. That is the essence of the bill, Madam Speaker. You apply, you pay a fee of $100. However, that $100 fee is to be suspended for 6 months, Madam Speaker. So persons who wish to get their license can get their license free of cost over the next 6 months. The license, Madam Speaker, is valid for 2 years. There's a register kept by the ministry, and your data is kept by the ministry. Because the minister may revoke your license, Madam Speaker, if you provided false information or misrepresented any information, if you have been convicted of a criminal offense punishable by a fine or imprisonment, if you have been issued with 3 or more tickets for smoking in a public area not designated for smoking. In essence, Madam Speaker, that's a 3 strikes you're out principle. If you get your license and you get 3 tickets for smoking in an area not designated, then you're at the risk of the minister revoking your license. If you have been diagnosed with a mental illness, your card can be revoked and most likely will be revoked. And if you have received treatment for substance abuse. So what this does, Madam Speaker, is allows the ministry to monitor if there are any abuses or there are persons who have any illnesses whatsoever, to take away or suspend the license of that person to ensure that that person is not abusing the substance. And Madam Speaker, combined with this access is also the responsibility that the Ministry of Health has taken on through the National Drug Council, who is going to engage a consultant to provide a framework to deal with substance abuse, given these new laws that are in place. So in other words, that consultant is going to come in, going to analyze the laws, going to take the data, see if there's an uptick in use or not, and develop a plan for the Ministry of Health to then implement if there is any uptick. Because, Madam Speaker, when we come to this House, we give rights, but we also expect to act responsibly. And I believe a member earlier said, I don't know if it was a member from Nevis 9, that said there has to be infrastructure in place to deal with the persons who might not be able to handle their use of cannabis under this new regime. And the responsible government on this side is doing that by ensuring that there are resources accessible to not only the Ministry of Health in St. Kitts, but the CMO also met with the Ministry of Health in Nevis. So the consultant is to develop a plan for both islands. Madam Speaker, to get your application, and I think this is important for the general public to know, you have to provide certain information. And you also have to sign a declaration. I want this declaration to be read into this Honourable House's records. I, John Doe, hereby declare, under the penalty of perjury, that I believe that the use of cannabis is an integral part of my religion, faith, or belief-based upliftment and edification, and I intend to cultivate and use cannabis pursuant to the limited provisions within the Freedom of Conscience Cannabis Act 2023 for my personal religion, faith, or belief-based upliftment and edification. I agree that I will not expose cannabis to minors or persons vulnerable to substance abuse. I also acknowledge that my license can be revoked by the minister pursuant to Section 7.2 of the Act. So once you provide your necessary information, and during the break, Madam Speaker, the member for number 9 also raised a matter in terms of whether a person has to provide their criminal record in their application. The idea in formulating this bill is that everybody deserves a second chance. So the license is accessible to someone even with a criminal record. However, after the license is issued, if that person commits a criminal offense, the minister can suspend or revoke their license. So, Madam Speaker, what this does, and let me see if I could summarize it. Our international law, as mentioned by the member for number 4, requires us to act responsibly and not allow rampant cultivation, which the international community believes can translate into rampant exportation illegally. So we have to show the international community as a responsible nation that we have regulated industries. By the Cannabis Act, we now have a regulated medicinal cannabis industry. By the Rastafari Rights Recognition Bill and the Freedom of Conscience Cannabis Bill, we now have a religious and freedom of conscience exception to the use and cultivation of cannabis. So there's medicinal and then there's constitutional required religious use. There is no recreational use by this legislation. I want to make that clear. There's only medicinal and freedom of conscience, religious use. Madam Speaker. The next bill we are going to debate today, which is amendments to the Drugs Act, deals with the decriminalization of cannabis-related offenses. But this bill simply allows, I heard the member for number 3 mention your cannabis card. However you want to style it, you get your license, and that license allows you to cultivate your 5 trees, to possess your 2 ounces, as well as to smoke in designated areas. If you partake in the use of cannabis for your freedom of conscience and religious reasons, which allows members of the Rastafari community who raised the question with me. Yes, if we join as a group and we register a place of assembly under the Rastafari Rights Recognition Bill, what happens to what we want to use at home? So naturally, if a member of a Rastafari group wants to have a certain amount to use at home, that person can get a license and then cultivate 5 trees and possess their 2 ounces at home for their own personal upliftment, separate and apart from the sacramental use as a part of the assembly. And this is what this legislation facilitates. As I said, Madam Speaker, we're going to embark on a public education campaign as to what are the do's and don'ts. And if there is time, Madam Speaker, when we're debating the next bill, I will then present all of the relevant slides to this country, which shows what are the do's and don'ts of the entire regime. I hope, Madam Speaker, that I've been clear as to what the Freedom of Conscience Cannabis Act does. And I can tell the general public, if they want clarity, they can visit from Thursday the cannabisclarity.gov.kn website, as well as the social media pages that will be established under that name. And also there will be a public education campaign generally on radio stations and by way of billboards. May it please you, Madam Speaker.